Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome to the Ben 10 crossover retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing the first televised crossover that Ben 10 has taken part in, Ben 10 Generator Rex Heroes United. Now, normally for my vlogs, how I typically start them off is that I usually talk about the plot of the episode or special that I'm focusing on. However, for these vlogs, before I get to that, I want to talk about the shows that are involved with each individual crossover, as the Ben 10 franchise has had multiple series, and each of the crossovers has had a different show in there for the most part. And of course, if you're just here for the Ben 10 stuff and are unfamiliar with the other side, it's good to get a refresher course. So that's how I plan to start each of these vlogs, and since they're the Ben 10 crossover retrospectives, each time we're going to start with the Ben 10 side of things. So, for today's episode, the Ben 10 show that was involved with the crossover was Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, the third Ben 10 series that was shown on air. The premise for Ben 10 Ultimate Alien was that the show took place at least a few weeks after the end of Alien Force, at most a year, at least enough time for everybody to have a birthday. Ben is now armed with a brand new Omnitrix called the Ultimatrix, which not only allows him to have access to most of his aliens forms from previous years, but also allows him to evolve those aliens into their ultimate forms, essentially more powerful, more souped up versions of his own aliens. He didn't use it for all of his aliens, he only used it for a handful, but whenever he used it, it was pretty cool. But in addition to having all this extra power, in the very first episode of Ultimate Alien, Ben's identity as a superhero was publicly outed, so everybody on Earth knew that Ben Tennyson was a superhero, that he had this watch that could transform into different aliens, and part of the show's deal was Ben adapting to his newfound fame, while also dealing with new oncoming threats that they have faced that he would face. Some of them were grander and bigger than others, including an alien named Agrigor, who wanted to gain ultimate power, as well as a near omniscient extra-dimensional Cthulhan monster who wanted to invade our realm. For me, Ben 10 Ultimate Alien was a show that started strong. It worked out. When it first began, it definitely carried a lot of the same. It carried with it the energy that Alien Force had. But unfortunately, as it neared its end, that energy just seemed to kind of taper out until eventually it just kind of turned dull. So, Ultimate Alien wasn't bad all the way, but it did have, even near the end, it still had some good stuff. But unfortunately, yeah, the show just kind of fell flat by the end. So, and it was also the show. So yeah, but as for the other side of the crossover, the other show that's featured is actually another Man of Action show called Generator Rex. And the premise for Generator Rex was that 5 years prior to that show itself, a group of scientists were creating these miniature microscopic machines called nanites, which were essentially meant to infuse within a human body and essentially cure all diseases, produce new cells, make someone overall better. However, for one reason or another, there was an accident in the experiment which resulted in a massive explosion that dispersed all the nanites that they had built into Earth's atmosphere, infecting every living thing on Earth with the nanites. Now, for the most part, people can still have normal, regular lives with nanites in their system. So people can still go to work and socialize, go to parties, etc. Just have a normal everyday life. But there are those who do have complications. Essentially, there are for every 1 in 10 people who are infected with nanites will evolve into a creature called an Evo. Usually a monstrous being with strange extra normal powers that while making them stronger, unfortunately kind of strips them of some of their higher brain function. As a result, it can turn a regular everyday person into a giant monster who will just randomly start destroying a city without really knowing what it's doing. As such, to combat this threat, a group was formed called Providence, a government agency who, whenever an Evo would pop up, they would swoop in, contain the situation and capture the Evo before and deal with the Evo before things got out of hand. However, which is where the main character of the show comes in. Rex is a kid who is actually related to the initial nanite incident that caused all of this. He also has nanites in his body, but they're from what was described as a different batch. Essentially, these nanites work for him completely, and through them, through his nanites, Rex can create, essentially build giant mechanical appendages which he can use to fight off Evos. Like, he can create, like, giant metal fists, blades, his own little, I want to say, hover scooter or whatever. He can even create, like, I want to say a winch, but he can create like a gun that can that grabs pavement and can turn it into ammunition. He's technically an Evo too, but he's an Evo who has complete control of his faculties and can completely control his powers. And an added bonus of him being an Evo, and an added bonus of his nanites, he has the power to cure Evos. Essentially, he can't strip someone completely of their nanites, but he can, in his own words, take away the ones that turn him into monsters. And essentially, the show was about him just dealing with everyday threats just dealing with the various threats that popped up, including his own rogues gallery, his own familial issues, having to learn from his past because he has amnesia, so he can't remember anything beyond maybe a few years ago, and essentially just trying to grow into his own person. It was actually a really good show in its tenure, and when I was on, I watched it a lot, and it was fun. It had a lot of the same creativity that Ben 10 had, and even Rex himself kind of felt like a median between Ben's characters. Like, he had the same fun-loving attitude that 10-year-old Ben had, while still having a bit of the maturity and serious-mindedness of 15-year-old Ben from the first 2 seasons of Alien Force. It was a nice mesh, and it had plenty of cool action, a lot of nice characters, a lot of good character arcs, and it was actually in my opinion, Generator X is kind of an underrated show. Like, it had a lot going for it, but at one point, and the whole reason I even stopped watching it was because I missed like one episode, and it's one of those shows that kind of every episode does kind of lead into the next in some way, shape, or form. And I wanted to catch up. I went too far behind, and by the time and unfortunately, yeah, the show was canceled before I could catch up more, which again sucks because it's a really good show, and honestly, one day I might want to do a vlog on it because it's a lot of fun and definitely showcases that Man of Action's territory isn't just Ben 10. So if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. So yeah, but with that being said, when Generator X did first air on TV, and I knew Man of Action was behind it, I knew one day they had to do a crossover with Ben 10. In some point, they would have to have Ben and Rex meeting. Now, of course, considering the nature of both shows, it couldn't just be like, oh, Ben met Rex on the street or whatever, or he's another superhero. No, you knew it had to be something like interconnected continuities, because especially since both shows have their secret government organizations, and yet, well, not really secret in Rex's case, but big organizations that the heroes work for. Considering the premise of Rex's show and the whole nanite thing, yeah, that's kind of something you can't just gloss over in Ben 10. And so, with that being said, when this crossover was finally announced, I like many other people were excited to see it happen, and especially excited to see these two characters from these two very good shows meeting. But with that being said, after all these years, does the crossover hold up? Is it just as hype as it was when I was a kid, or is it best left forgotten? So, well, let's talk about the plot and find out. So, yeah, in terms of story, the plot actually kicks off in New York, while the citizens of New York are just doing their own thing, going about their everyday jobs, a rift opens up in the sky. A giant ball of light appears, which is shooting off lightning and pretty much just causing a lot of collateral damage. As a result, with such a big and prominent problem, of course, the people whose jobs are to deal with this sort of thing are called to deal with it. In other words, Providence. Now, I should probably mention this. At this point in the show, Rex was not technically a part of Providence. There was one point in the show when Rex got sent like 6 months into the future, and when he wound up in the future, he found that Providence had gone under new management, because the original leader of Providence was a man by the name of White Knight, the only human being on Earth who was not infected with nanites. And in the 6 months in the 6 month skip that Rex missed, White Knight had been replaced with a woman named Black Knight, who's a bit more ruthless, a bit more conniving, a bit more quiet, but and as a result of this, Rex wound up leaving Providence and joined up with his team. To essentially be their own little splinter group, still doing their own thing, but just not a part of Providence. Of course, yeah. But anyway, so Providence is of course called in to deal with it, but of course since it's a big disaster, of course Rex and his team are brought in to deal with it. Rex's team mostly consists of a super intelligent gorilla called Bobo Haha. He's voiced by John DiMaggio, he's a smartass. An attractive, intelligent doctor named Dr. Holiday, and the sixth deadliest assassin on Earth called, well, Six, who acts as kind of a surrogate father figure for Rex. As such, backstory aside, Rex and his team are called in to also deal with this little disaster, but of course, Rex is wondering, well, how can I fight this thing? It's a giant ball of energy. We can't exactly, just punch it. Although, when Rex does get in closer to it, the lightning does knock him aside, so yeah, this is still a big problem, so they need to find a way to take it down. However, as Rex is just watching it, Dr. Holiday mentions that she sees something bioorganic in the middle of the field, and it's coming through. And so when Rex looks, he sees something flying from the rift, and so, him being the superhero, he goes in to punch it, and the thing manages to catch his fist and punch him down to the ground below. As a result, Rex gets ready to battle, and whatever this thing was comes down to the ground as well, and as we see it come into the light, we see that the thing that Rex is fighting is Humongosaur. Yep, Ben has come through. And as a result of this, Ben and Rex get into our first fight of the episode. And admittedly, it's actually a really good fight. It's actually a nice way to start things off, because the fight actually showcases both fighters' individual strengths, especially in battle, especially in terms of their technical mindsets. As both sides, as the battle continues on, both Rex and Ben keep trying to find ways to adapt to the other's strategies and take them down. For example, Rex is under the impression that Ben is an Evo and that he's connected to the ball of light that's coming through, and so of course he gets close to Ben, and so of course he uses it. He creates this whip thing to try and hold Ben in place, and to get out of it, Ben goes diamond head and cuts through it. So Rex pulls out his own sword. They get into a makeshift sword fight that causes them to fall. The fight to go all across the city. Ben realizes, okay, your machines are made of metal, so he goes low to deal with it. So Rex, in response, creates that little scoop thing. It's a little scoop cannon, whatever. I think it's a slingshot. Don't know. I think I know what the word is, but it's not coming to me. And he managed to adapt around that by essentially using the environment to make makeshift cannons to fight Ben. So again, it's showing both of them being creative and taking advantage of their abilities to their fullest to try and take the other down. However, while they're fighting, it turns out something else comes through the rift. This weird mechanical creature that seems to be jumping around New York. As a result, Six goes to deal with that, while Six doesn't really make a lot of headway in that fight, he does manage to cut a piece of this creature off and plans to give it to Dr. Holiday, but they get some intervention from Providence, specifically Rex's brother. Again, yeah, this kind of requires some explanation. In the show, at one point, Providence did find one of Rex's family. In this case, a boy named Cesar, who is essentially a child prodigy. Super intelligent. He's super intelligent, does clearly care about Rex, but in Rex's own words, he's also a little crazy, and he does still work for Providence. So he's not part of their group. So he's kind of in a moral gray area when it comes to Rex and Co. But bottom line, he's not here to cause a fight, because while Ben and Rex are having their fight and Six was dealing with this mechanical thing, Providence was able to stabilize the rift. They can't close it, but at least managed to stop it from shooting out lightning. As such, when they're dealing with this, White Knight actually contacted Black Knight, because he's part of the group too, and he offers a temporary ceasefire so they can work together to close the rift, which Black Knight does eventually reluctantly agree to. So as a result, but in the meantime, However, while they were doing that, Cesar was just kind of having a ball with seeing the rift and how it worked, when suddenly his sensors went off, which resulted in him leaving and eventually meeting up with Dr. Holiday and Six. He takes the chunk of the creature away from the group. He takes the chunk of the creature that Six cut off and flies away, which allows Six to go back to catching up to the creature. But in the meantime, as Rex and Ben continue their battle, it caused them to go further into the city and hits a billboard, causing the supports to give way and fall to the street below, which in turn causes both Ben and Rex to call a timeout. Something that surprises both sides, but they decide to take advantage of it by getting the civilians out of the way. With Rex causing his little hover bike or whatever to move a few civilians out of the way, while Ben goes wrath and pushes the news reporter and her cameraman out of the way. As such, while Rex is thankful they exist, he manages to create another build and sneak attack Ben, knocking him to the ground. However, when he tries to go into, cure Ben, again, nothing happens, which causes Rex to realize, wait, you're not an Evo. And of course, Ben's response is, I have no idea what the hell an Evo is. I'm just trying to do my own thing. Rex says, what, you're trying to destroy, you're trying to destroy the city? He's like, destroy? What, do you even know who I am? Which, as such, Ben transforms back and says, I'm Ben Tennyson, and of course, different universe, different continuity, so nobody knows who the hell Ben is. However, that little bit of awkwardness is short-lived, as while Ben is wondering why no one knows who he is, Six comes in riding on top of the mechanical creature, and he manages to land a killing blow on this thing, causing it to blow up, but also severely injuring Six to the point where he is in a coma. Something that gets to Rex, something that really gets to Rex to the point where he actually blames Ben. As such, after that, they managed to bring Six and Ben. Rex and Co. managed to bring Six and Ben back to their hideout, and Six is put in essentially a pod to help him heal and recuperate, while Ben is essentially placed into a tube so that they can keep an eye on him and figure out exactly what's going on, figure out exactly what he is. In the meantime, though, while White Knight is dealing with helping Black Knight close the rift, he does tell his team that they need to get on the creature, because while Rex says that the creature went boom, video footage of this scene shows that something flew away from the explosion, like a weird red orb. So clearly, that whatever that creature was, they haven't heard the last of it. When Ben hears this, he offers his help, but Rex is clearly antagonistic towards him, since he partly blames Ben for what happened to Six. While Ben is trying to be cordial and talk and say, look, I'm sorry about your friend, he was clearly important to you, but we need to figure out what this thing is and what's going on. And more specifically, he says he doesn't really know what the hell is going on. And when Dr. Holiday scans Ben, sure enough, she does think that him not knowing what the heck's going on does have credence, since Ben says he's clueless about all the Evos and nanites and whatever. And according to Dr. Holiday's scans, his nanite absorption rate shows that he came through the rift without any. So, yeah, clearly they do realize that he's probably not entirely lying here. But like I said, Ben is still offering to help them find the creature, and it especially helps that as they're gaining more and more details, they are pretty much figuring out that they are slowly piecing together that Ben is from another world, though both sides don't entirely believe it yet, especially since Dr. Holiday said multiverse theory is just that, a theory at best. However, as Ben continues talking, Rex eventually tells him to just shut up because, like I said, Rex is grieving. But Ben says, exactly, we're not gonna figure anything out if we're just standing here bickering and talking. To which Rex responds with, if you haven't noticed, we're holding you captive. To which Ben just smugly smirks and says, you aren't holding me captive, I was just staying to see if I could help. At which point, Ben goes big chill and just phases right out of his cell and flies away. Rex ends up going after him, and they manage to fly to what's essentially the Generator Rex version of Bellwood. And the reason they're here is because Ben wants to get confirmation that he really is in another universe. And sure enough, he does, as when he goes to where Mr. Smoothie is supposed to be, it's instead a restaurant called Bob's Biscuit Barn. Which does finally confirm to Ben that this is in fact a parallel universe. Which apparently gets to Ben because, well, in this universe, his family and friends don't exist, so he's completely alone. To which I respond with, he's been to other dimensions before and he's found his way out. This is not really this whole conflict feels a little forced. This pathos, I mean. So I don't know. It feels like that this is just added in there to try and give Ben something to be grieving about, but it does manage to get Rex to warm up to Ben enough to at least stop treating him antagonistically. However, their little moment doesn't last very long as Caesar comes in his own little ship, and while Rex does vouch for Caesar and say he's a pretty cool guy, the instant where Caesar lands his ship and steps outside, he's carrying a gun which he points at Rex. Ben is able to go Diamond Head and deflect the blast right back at Caesar's blaster, but ultimately this ends up damaging it, and Caesar says, "No, we needed that." And when Ben and Rex are like, "Well, what the hell for? To kill us?" That they suddenly get their answer as we see the red orb from before coming closer, and we see it then form a body. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where we see the villain for our special, Alpha. And I'm just going to kind of give Alpha's whole deal right here, because in the next scene, Caesar gives the full details already. Essentially, Alpha's a nanite. But like Rex, he's a nanite that can control other nanites. He can essentially being able to communicate with them. And as Caesar confirms, he created him. Essentially, back when the Nanite project was in its infancy, the scientists that were in charge were trying to figure out what the control system for the nanites were. Half the scientists believing that people should be able to control the nanites, while the other half believed that the nanites should just control themselves, with Caesar being in the latter count. As such, to better control the nanites, he created, well, the Alpha Nanite, which is why as we've seen, can control other nanites and, well, other machines. However, to ensure that Alpha would be at his most efficient, Caesar made it so that Alpha could think for itself, and that little augmentation caused Alpha to essentially develop a consciousness, and with that consciousness, Alpha wanted to, well, build a body. He wanted to be whole, as he put it. But unfortunately, while Alpha could control nanites, doing this kind of burned through them. Any nanites that Alpha took control of and used would eventually burn out and become dead, meaning that any bodies that Alpha built only lasted for so long before they burnt out too. As such, Alpha decided, well, if I can't build a mechanical body, maybe I could use an organic one. And it's at this point, and when Alpha came to that revelation, Caesar realized, okay, this guy needs to go. As such, he developed what he called a void gun, which is essentially a null void projector. And with it, he was able to trap Alpha in the null void, which he didn't know anything about the null void. All he knew is that he created a portal to what he thought was an empty pocket dimension. So he thought that Alpha would just be stuck there forever. Well, based on the information they have, they were able to figure out that when Alpha was trapped in the null void, he managed to latch onto another one of the denizens, a mechanical one, which was the body we saw at the beginning of this special. And through the null void, he managed to escape. They don't give the full details. They just say that he was trying to find his way back to Rex's universe, and he was latched onto Ben's. And he latched onto Ben, and in his escape attempts, he latched onto the Ultimatrix because of how powerful it was. But my best guess is what happened was that Alpha managed to latch on to the host and managed to get out through a portal because of course the plumbers could open portals to the null void all the time. He could have slipped through that, or as we've seen as been said in other specials, sometimes random portals open up between the null void and our universe. So he could have easily just slipped through one of those and then got attracted to Ben's Ultimatrix before he found a way to rip open a gateway between time and space to get back to Rex's. But bottom line, Alpha is now back, and while he's in Rex's universe, he's essentially picking up where he left off, absorbing nanites and trying to build a new body. But as we've seen, they're not exactly stable. Even in his introduction scene, when he's begging Caesar to help him, the body he has is not stable and is clearly falling apart. Thankfully, he doesn't manage to get any headway as Rex and Ben are able to fend Alpha off, but when Alpha is forced to retreat, that's when Ben, Rex, and Caesar have to follow after him, and Caesar gives all of Alpha's deal, explains his backstory. However, after that, As such, after that little conversation ends, Alpha manages to attack Caesar's ship, and Caesar himself manages to make a getaway and pretty much ditches Ben and Rex and causes the ship to blow up. Now, Ben posits that Caesar knew that Rex and Ben would get out of there, since causing it to blow up would allow them to get away from Alpha, but I'm just as dubious as Rex is in that regard. As such, while Rex does get a call from Dr. Holliday stating that the Knights have found a way to close the rift and that Ben should go back while he can, Ben is not going anywhere. He posits that while this may not be his Earth, this is still Earth, and if this thing is out there threatening people, then he wants to do something about it, which, again, is still reflective of Ben's character. And while Rex does try to say, this isn't your fight, it's ours, that clearly fell on deaf ears, because in the next scene, Ben is helping Rex. And sure enough, that next scene is, well, back at quote-unquote, at Rex and Co.'s base, as Alpha has managed to break into there, and I want to say break into a garden or a greenhouse. Essentially, it's a place where they keep more feral evos who they're experimenting on to try and find more cures for, because there are some uncurable evos. And he essentially just breaks into the greenhouse and starts absorbing all these evos' nanites. And yeah, while it's clear that while Rex can just absorb the bad nanites, Alpha can absorb all of them, because literally any creature he absorbs nanites from turns to dust and crumbles away. So yeah, the guy's kind of nuts. As such, Ben and Rex rush to the base, which is also the first time we see Accelerated with Ultimate Alien and Ben. And so they're able to fend off Alpha. However, during the fight, Alpha tried absorbing Rex, because when he first fought Rex, he saw that Rex could absorb nanites, and he thought this kid might have the secret to giving me a full body. As such, during this fight, he tried absorbing Rex, but found that he couldn't merge, and as he looked more into Rex to see why, it's because of something in Rex's body. Something called an Omega Nanite. Again, going back to Generator Rex, at one point in the show, Rex actually wound up meeting someone from the original Nanite team. He was a little crazy, kind of nuts, but he wound up injecting Rex with the Omega Nanite, claiming at the time that it was everything. And as we learned here, the Omega Nanite is essentially meant to be the counterpart to Alpha, and as it can control nanites just as well as Alpha can, but it has to be controlled by a human host, in this case, Rex. And the best part about it is that it also has the power to create more nanites, as when Rex was able to tap into the Omega Nanite, he had at one point lost all of his original nanites, and the Omega Nanite was able to create more. And on top of that, the Omega Nanite gave him some newer, more powerful builds. Beyond what he already had. So this thing is clearly very powerful, and the instant Alpha learns that Rex has it, he wants it. Again, he's sent off. Ben, Rex, and Holiday are able to fight Alpha off enough to get him into retreating, but it's clear that he's now after Rex, and unfortunately, he knows that if he wants to take on Rex, he needs to at least get somewhat more powerful. As such, after he leaves, we get some small character stuff between Ben and Rex, as they're just kind of goofing off and trying to pass the time until Alpha comes back, as while Rex and Ben rather go hunting for him. The Dr. Holliday's reasoning is that Alpha is after Rex, so maybe he'll come back. But in the meantime, though, they do manage to get some activity on Alpha, as it turns out he has attacked a place in the Generator Rex universe called the Bug Jar. Essentially, it is an entire city that is filled with uncurable evos. Anyone that's inside is essentially mutated forever, and no one can do anything about it. So instead of just nuking the city, they felt the best option for this was to essentially just bar it off in the rest of the world via an unpenetrable force field. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out, because maybe one day they can find a cure, but yeah, Alpha found a way in and actually managed to disrupt the force field. As such, Ben, Rex, and White Knight, because I've been neglecting to mention this, White Knight's wearing a suit to keep himself being affected with nanites. All three of them go to the Bug Jar and find it mysteriously, empty, only encountering one of the Bug Jar's residents, who then is quickly turned into dust and who flies up into a whirlwind into like a giant whirlwind storm floating above the bug jar, which White Knight says is the entire nanite population. And sure enough, the storm coalesces onto the ground to form a newer, bigger, more stable body for Alpha, one that's more monstrous and bigger. As such, White Knight says that they have to just keep that the plan is essentially just fend off Alpha keep Alpha from getting to Rex, because as Caesar said, the body won't last. They just have to keep fighting him until he burns through all of his nanites, and then he's not a problem anymore. But again, if he gets to Rex's Omega, that's game over. As such, they start fighting Alpha and do up a decent fight in the beginning, but Alpha manages to turn the tides by, well, shooting a tendril out to the Ultimatrix and shorting it out, causing Ben to turn back. And, well, and then after knocking White Knight aside, he grabs Rex and tries absorbing the Omega. But Rex is able to fight off Alpha enough so that he can't to stop him from getting the Omega Nanite. But it's clear that doing that did take a lot out of him. And while Rex confirms that as long as he can fight back, he can stop Alpha from getting the Omega Nanite, unfortunately, that just means that Alpha has to think of a new strategy. Which brings me back to Ben. You see, Ben did manage to go alien and help Rex briefly, and so Alpha looks at Ben and says, "Your machine looks very useful, Organic." And as such, he shoots another tendril and zaps the Ultimatrix again. Only this time, when he zaps the Ultimatrix, he manages to use it to absorb some of Ben's own nanites, and create his own Ultimatrix, allowing Alpha to transform into his own monstrous versions of Ben's aliens, which we don't see all of them. We only see a handful of 3, but they all look really damn cool. Like, we see this giant monstrous version of Heat Blast with his own fiery tail. We see him what looks like a mutated forearms with the Ultimatrix symbol kind of creating veins across his body. And we see a much more Tyrannosaurus-like version of Humongosaur. It's really damn cool, and it's just awesome to see. And it's also, and I should probably mention this as well. During the fight, Ben does briefly get the Ultimatrix back up and running, and during the fight, and when he gets it back up, he managed to transform into, well, what's essentially a new alien. Which I'm only mentioning because this special was this alien's first appearance. The alien in question is called Shock Squatch, an alien Sasquatch with electric powers who, I'm sorry to say, is not fully utilized in this special. At best, his appearance is meant to be like a sneak peek of what we're going to be expecting in Ben 10 Omniverse, because Shock Squatch is one of the new aliens that Ben has access to in Omniverse. And honestly, in Omniverse, Shock Squatch is used a lot better, as we see the full extent of his powers there, see how he can control electricity, how he can funnel it, and how because of his Sasquatch body, we can see he's a lot more durable, can fight has some slight super strength, some kind of agility. So all that's cool, but this initial outing doesn't really do that. At best, all we see is that he's a Sasquatch with electric powers as he manages to shoot off an electric blast at Alpha and knock him aside. But the Ultimatrix just kind of shorts out before Ben can do any more, so. It also doesn't help that this initial design is not that great. Shock Squatch's design in Ben 10 Omniverse, I think, is actually a lot cooler. It's a lot bigger, more colorful. Just kind of helps emphasize how much power he truly has behind him. Whereas Shock Squatch in this initial appearance is kind of bland. He's just kind of a gray and white Sasquatch with a little electric volts around his body, so yeah, not really a good first outing. Definitely has a lot of better stuff later on, but first appearance, not that great. However, White Knight is able to get back into the game, and he, along with Ben, who does briefly manage to distract Alpha by throwing an insult his way, they manage to distract Alpha enough for Ben to get close to his Ultimatrix symbol and short it out too, resulting in Alpha reverting back to his original monstrous form. Unfortunately, the strain of the fight, as well as shorting out Alpha's Ultimatrix, did wound up wearing Rex out and allowed Alpha to go in for the kill, so to speak, as he manages to grab Rex's fists and absorb the Omega Nanite. While Rex still has Rex still has his powers because the Omega Nanite was not the complete source of that. With the loss of the Omega Nanite, it also means not only means the loss of his more powerful builds, but also a massive upgrade for Alpha. As with the Omega Nanite, he's able to essentially further evolve. As like I said, the Omega Nanite can create more nanites, and so with its added power, he managed to transform into an even more monstrous form, which he dubs Alpha Omega. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to keep calling him Alpha, but so. As such, Alpha, with his newfound power, Alpha begins essentially destroying more of the bug jar, which Doc Holliday says he's using to systematically create more nanites. And in the meantime, Rex is kind of beating himself up because Alpha now has the Omega, things are going from bad to worse, and while Ben is trying to keep an upbeat attitude, saying, "I don't think this is how things are supposed to go out. I've seen what you've done." Rex responds with, "Well, what do you do when your best just isn't enough?" And Ben's response is, "You get an upgrade." As such, Ben goes to the Ultimatrix again. It's working now at this point, and as such, he ends up going upgrade again. First appearance of this guy in Ultimate Alien, and I like his design here. It's kind of looks like Basil's with a green body with some little bit more wire stuff in there. And with upgrades power, since Rex has mostly nanites in his system and his whole power is building machines, Ben is able to use upgrade to merge with him and create essentially an upgrade suit, so to speak, which allows Rex to essentially upgrade his builds, which is now back to the basic stuff, but it's still a lot cooler. Like he can make his giant fist is now has spikes on it. His hover scooter now moves faster and has its own little like helmet, its own flight suit. We see him be able to shoot missiles with his like scoop thing, and even with his jetpack, he's able to shoot missiles. Which Rex is able to use all of these to fight off Alpha and even chop off some parts of its body. But as we saw earlier in the special, Alpha can regenerate, and again with the Omega Nanite, he can just build more nanites to replace what he lost. So even with this added power, Alpha is able to knock both Rex and Ben aside. As such, once they're both knocked to the ground, they demerge, causing Ben to transform back. Rex and Ben realize that if they want to do some serious damage to Alpha, they need to go after the Omega. Because even if they don't want to destroy it, disrupting that should affect Alpha, since it's the source of all the nanites that Alpha is using right now to build his body, so disrupting that could disrupt Alpha. As such, Rex once more creates his giant scoop cannon whatever, and essentially the plan is this: launch Ben at Alpha as cannon bolt. If they can find where the Omega Nanite is in his body and Ben hits it, it should be able to hurt Alpha enough to turn him into giant smoke and to destabilize his body. So, sure enough, that's what they do. As he scoops Ben up, Ben goes cannonbolt, and he launches right into Alpha's body, hitting the Omega and causing Alpha to go haywire and turning into a giant puff of smoke. As such, while Alpha is weakened, Rex is able to go in and uses his own nanite controlling abilities to start to begin condensing Alpha's form down. Thankfully, the Omega Nanite is kept safe from all this, as Caesar comes in and he has a machine which locates the Omega Nanite and pulls it out before Alpha is too shrunken down. But essentially, after Rex's intervention, Alpha's body is now condensed into this orb, or with a density that's so high that literally nothing can slip through the molecules, including Alpha. As such, with Alpha now taken care of, there now is the matter of where to put him. With Caesar once more suggesting that they put him in the null void. Of course, this isn't exactly what they think is a great plan, but again, considering what the form he's in, he might not be a threat anymore. And on top of that, while Caesar has been able to repair his void gun, unfortunately, he doesn't know how long the repairs will last, so they pretty much only have one shot. So Ben and Rex just kind of decide, okay, this is probably for the best. So Caesar opens a portal to the null void. Ben gives his farewells, goes up Chuck to carry Alpha's orb out of there, and Ben goes on his way, dropping off Alpha in the Null Void while presumably calling the plumbers to come and get him out of there. As such, the episode ends with Rex going back to the base, and it turns out that Six is fine. Six is fine as well. Six is fine as when Rex arrives, he's actually back up already and going to the bathroom. And when Rex goes to see him, he gives him a hug. He's all happy, and pretty much Rex laments that that Ben was pretty cool when he got to know him, and he hopes to see him again. And Six says that might happen because sometimes certain people are meant to meet up so they could easily see each other again, which they do in a comic. Which again I'm not talking about here. I'm just talking about the televised stuff. So I recommend looking that up. But ultimately, Caesar comes in with the Omega Nanite to inject it back into Rex. And the episode ends with cutting to the Null Void and already seeing that while that Alpha's orb is starting to break, which means he could potentially come back. Spoilers, he doesn't. So, yeah, that was Ben 10 Generator Rex Heroes United, and my thoughts on the episode as a whole? It's pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. I suppose I should probably talk about what I felt about the episode didn't work, and one of those aspects, unfortunately, is character stuff. One of the problems that this episode kind of has is when it comes to Ben and Rex's relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, what we do see is good, and we do see that Ben and Rex do mesh well together when put in the same room. But their relationship is not really that well developed. Because the thing is, when they first meet, Ben and Rex see each other as enemies, and while they do eventually realize there's been a misunderstanding, nothing really is improved. If anything, it gets worse because of what happens to Six. And in the beginning, Rex acts irrational, unsteady, angry towards Ben, and so, as well, he needs someone to blame. Of course, Ben's not the one responsible, as Alpha was the one that opened the rift and was the one that unintentionally hurt Six. But their subsequent interactions don't really lend a lot for them to get closer. It's just like bare bones stuff. And when we do see Rex and Ben making progress, it kind of feels rushed. Like it doesn't. Like, they come to all the conclusions they come to really don't feel like they should be had in the amount of time they had to interact. Like, for example, when Ben went back to Bellwood and realized that this wasn't his home, and this confirms that he's probably away from his family and so forth, Rex immediately decided to be, when Rex says, well, maybe we can help each other to try and make him feel better, while I do sort of buy that as a way of progressing their relationship, immediately after, when Caesar shows up, Rex starts acting a lot more nice to Ben, especially when explaining Caesar, which I don't feel like he should be that cordial to Ben that quickly. I'm not saying Ben doesn't deserve it, but at the same time, it feels like that they shouldn't be at that level yet. It feels like that they probably skipped a few steps there. And every subsequent interaction is really just them. It doesn't really do much to make everything go to let the relationship continue to grow. It's just them kind of hanging out, goofing off slightly, and working together. While they do have moments that do definitely show their relationship is progressing in a more positive way, like when Rex is beating himself up over Alpha getting the Omega. At the same time, a lot of the quiet moments between them don't really last as long as they should, and as a result, Ben and Rex's relationship doesn't feel as fleshed out. If anything, it feels kind of rushed in a lot of places. Which, again, to be fair, when we do see Ben and Rex working together, they do actually work well off each other. Which is actually a positive in this special's favor. Ben and Rex as a fighting team work well together. They really know how to complement each other, and their attitudes can actually mesh well in the middle of battle. They're both kind of impulsive, but both have their eye on the ball. They both can adapt. They both can be creative with their environments and their own abilities. They know when to work. They know when to work around things, know when to take advantage of certain situations. It's actually really nice, and they do work well off of each other in battle. So I'm not saying they're a bad team. There is still clearly a connection there. There clearly is something to their relationship. It's just that when we want to see that relationship developed, it just moves a little too fast. So I'm counting that as a flaw in the episode, towards the episode. Another flaw that I also kind of notice is the stuff with Ben. Because believe it or not, his pathos about being stuck in another world, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. I'm not saying that it's not a real problem, as being trapped in another world away from everyone you know and love is a legitimate thing, is a legitimate fear. But for someone like Ben, who has done crap like this a lot for years at least, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a false pathos, especially since Ben mentioned when in the beginning of the when he was talking with Rex's group that he's traveled to other dimensions all the time. He's been in the null void before. He's seen other worlds. And while there is a risk of being trapped in those other worlds, this is Ben we're talking about. He could think of even if he was trapped in another world, I could see him still trying to find ways to help his friends, try and find a way back. And for the most part in the episode, he has that attitude. Like I said, one of the cool moments that I like that fits his character is that when Holiday says the portal that the rift is closing, so Ben should go back. Ben just says, "No way, I'm staying here. The world is in danger. I'm not just going to go running away." That is a totally Ben moment. It's just that when Ben says, it's like, "Oh, wait, remember what I love. No one exists here, yada, yada, yada." That feels so forced. It feels like they just put in a false pathos there just to try and set up Rex feeling sorry for him and deciding, okay, I should probably be nicer to this guy. Which, okay, to be fair, I feel like, it's okay, which is okay to be fair, but that's the only time we see Ben lamenting this. Otherwise, he's more focused on working with Rex to stop Alpha, and so it doesn't really feel as fleshed out as it should. So that really just kind of feels like false pathos. Speaking of which, another problem I also notice about this episode, it's kind of one-sided in terms of story. Now, don't get me wrong. The Ben 10 side of the crossover is good. Ben is not an unimportant character in this special. He does play a large part. He works with Rex and definitely carries his weight in terms of where he is in the story. He and Rex work well off of each other. He's able to think of situations and think of ways out of them. He does play his part. He's still a major important part of the story, and he does not drag. In terms of fighting abilities, he and Rex are pretty much even. It's just that when it comes down to the story, it's favored more towards the Generator Rex side of things, with Ben kind of being a bystander. The only reason Ben got involved in this was because when Caesar was looking for a place to put Alpha, he wound up putting him in the Null Void, and when Alpha escaped, it's presumed he escaped to Ben's universe and was attracted to Ben because of the Ultimatrix. But because of that connection, when Alpha did mainly manage to get back to Rex's universe, he just dragged Ben with him. As such, for the most part, the story really doesn't have a lot to do with Ben and his journey to want to get back home. The threat is primarily something that deals with Generator Rex. And for the most part, the story is Rex's. Again, Ben is not an unimportant player. He does help out, and when Rex gets into slumps or feels like things are just not going well, Ben is able to step in and say, "Look, I think we can still do this. We can still keep going. You just gotta keep fighting." So that is still a good thing, but therein lies the key point. Whenever Rex gets into a slump, I feel like, going back to what I said about Ben's pathos feeling forced about him being trapped in another world, that could have actually worked for the episode's advantage. Like, maybe Ben, of course it makes sense for Ben to stay and want to help, but maybe, have a moment where he realizes or he says, okay, or he says, after that, we can try and find a way to get me home, if that's possible. And maybe have a moment where Rex has to comfort him and say, "Hey, we'll help you get home, but until then, your help is very much appreciated." That, I think, would have been done better. But aside from that forced moment of pathos, there's nothing really about... The plot has nothing to do with Ben or any of his struggles. It's Rex that has to deal with the lion's share of it. As the episode begins with Rex getting training from Six and talking about how awesome his life is and how everything is cool, before Six reminds him that any moment it can be taken away. And sure enough, in this entire episode, things are kind of going to hell. Six is in a coma. There is this monster from his brother's past coming in that's hunting him and wants to steal his powers. We got and even while he does his best to try and fight it off, eventually this thing manages to take his powers. So yeah, his world's kind of going to hell, and while he does try and hold it together for the most part, he doesn't he does have moments where he looks like he's about to break. Which, to be fair, that story's not bad. It is pretty good, and does make sense for X's character. It's just that for the crossover, Ben doesn't really get a lot of that sort of thing. He's an important player in Rex's story, but again, it's mostly Rex's story. Ben is just another player. Like I said, an important player. He does a lot, and they do not make him look weaker in comparison to Rex. They show that he's still a major part of everything. It's just that, again, by virtue of this being primarily in Rex's universe, there's not really a lot to. There doesn't feel. It feels like more his story, which I think a way of evening that out, if they, a solution they could have done, probably focus on what's going on in Ben's universe too. Like, how are his friends reacting to him just up and disappearing after, as Ben said, giant flash in the sky while he was doing a TV interview? Wouldn't they be worried about him? Maybe have his team reach through and contact White Knight and co. and say, hey, hey, we got a signal through. Hey, is anyone there? We're looking for Ben Tennyson. And maybe have both teams coming together and show that there are people on Ben's side who are just as worried about getting Ben back as Ben is worried about not getting back. So I think that would have actually helped everything and pushed and would have given more even focus between Rex and Ben. But unfortunately, because the special primarily focuses on Rex's story over Ben's, it kind of feels one-sided in that regard. So yeah, I think I'm going to count that as a problem. But that being said, though, a lot of the rest of the special more than makes up for it. One thing that both Generator X and Ben 10 have in common: the fight scenes are friggin' awesome. And this special has plenty of awesome fight scenes. Like I said, Ben and Rex in terms of abilities and fighting prowess are very much equal. And whenever they're in a fight together, whether it's against each other or with each other, they work well. They both can adapt to the situations. They both can work around anything. Both can work around whatever their opponents throw at them, and at no point do they ever feel one-sided. I think there was only one battle where things were where Rex had more emphasis on him rather than Ben, and that was when Alpha shorted out the Ultimatrix. But every other battle shows Ben and Rex working well together, showing most of their abilities. Not one of them is. When it comes to them working together, neither of them is shown to be weaker than the other. They're both given good focus and show that they can work well together, which is part of why I think their relationship does work when we actually see them interacting. Because while the small stuff does feel forced, in an actual battle, they're a tight-knit pair, and it really shows. On top of that, Alpha, very good villain. He's very creepy. As the introduction with him has him have like a soft-spoken voice, but at the same time, there's clearly a bit of venom to him. As the first scene we see of him is going to Caesar and him calling him, it's like, why are you surprised, Father? I am your Alpha. I've come home. Are you pleased? And the instant Caesar says, no, I'm not pleased, Alpha reacts negatively as he jumps down, because he was standing on Rex's and Caesar's ship, as he jumps down and grabs him by his shirt. So it's that response clearly did not make him happy. So he's definitely a creepy villain, and as the episode goes on, his more violent tendencies become a lot more apparent in his mannerisms. You see him getting from calmer to angrier to more aggressive, and even a bit more snarky. Like going back to the scene where he managed to create his own Ultimatrix, when Rex calls him out. At one point, he tries to kill Ben, and Rex calls him out and says, "Your fight's with me." And he says, "You presume to know much, brother. Organics that rely on machines I have no use for, but the machines themselves, now those I will have." So that's just a bit of snarkiness in there. So Alpha's actually a pretty strong villain, and I think he works well. It also helps that he created his own Ultimatrix briefly, so I think that's cool. That was really cool. And again, what does help is that while the story does kind of suffer from being more emphasized on Rex than with Ben, there is still legitimate pathos. Rex's journey throughout the episode does feel genuine. His anger at Ben, while misplaced, does feel like a natural reaction to losing someone he cares about. When we see him kind of having little mini freakouts and kind of falling apart. Sorry, dog is over there. It does feel like these are natural steps, especially since the problem is not getting any better, and he doesn't know what, and he does come, and there are points when he doesn't know what to do. But again, what helps get him through it is Ben, who's right there saying, we can do this, we can work together, and we can take him down. So I think that all does work, and as a result, of course, we got some good animation, and we got some nice plot points, some nice revelations, especially with Alva's backstory. For the most part, what makes this episode strong is just seeing Ben and Rex working off of each other. Not, like I said, while the story emphasizes Rex more than Ben, in terms of plot importance, Ben is still a big part. And in terms of, and when it comes to them working together, they work well off each other. They have good banter. There are plenty of good jokes. Like there's one, like when Ben, during the fight with Alpha, when Alpha tries absorbing the Omega, Ben's only contribution is throwing a rock, which just hits Rex. Or even when Ben and Rex are about to run to the bug jar to fight Alpha, they accidentally put on the other's coats, and so they both have like admittedly funny scene where they both just kind of comment on each other's attire. And Bobo says, if you guys are our hope for saving the world, we're doomed. So I think that works. There is still a lot to like. The action is really good. The plot, while one-sided, does still have some nice pathos for Rex and where he goes. Ben and Rex's relationship do feel rushed. They actually do work well off each other with very similar personalities and cool fighting prowess. Of course, their powers themselves are all still really cool and work well together. Alpha himself is a strong villain, and while there are moments that do feel rushed, the plot does move at a decent pace and does continue to keep going and does continue escalating at just the right moments. So, again, while this crossover does have its moments that don't work, for the most part, it's still a lot of fun, and I think that's what the primary focus should be. It's fun. The crossover is not trying to be something big or serious. It's just taking these two franchises that Man of Action created, meshing them together, and just having a ball, which is what classic Ben 10 was all about, just having fun. And this, in my opinion, does that well. It's a fun special. It's not the greatest, it's not perfect, but for what it is, it's definitely worth looking into, especially if you're interested in either franchise. So, if you haven't checked out Ben 10 Generator X Heroes United, I highly recommend trying to find it. It's a lot of fun, has great action, has great action, fun characters, good jokes, good villain. Overall, it's just pretty good. Not great, but still pretty good and worth watching. So, yeah, that's about all I have to say. So, I thank you for watching. As I said in the beginning, I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week where we take a look at the next televised crossover that Ben 10 took part in, as we see him interacting with a certain secret family in the Ben 10 Omniverse episode TGIS.